Our presentation is about the book Human Evolution and Chapter 7-8. We will talk about Chapter 7, The Fourth Transition, Modern Humans, Chapter 8, How Kinship, Language and Culture Came to Be, and finally, our question for the author. Chapter 7 includes the following sections: Introduction, the history in the genes, an ingenious solution to an impossible problem, when did language evolve, a small problem of reproduction, and whatever happened to the Neanderthals.
Introduction. Around 200,000 years ago, a more gracile form of hominin appeared in Africa, the anatomical modern human, AMH. By 100,000 years ago, they had replaced archaic populations in Africa, but in the rest of the world, the archaic were the only hominins remaining. By 70,000 years ago, the AMH experienced an exodus from Africa to Europe and Asia, by crossing the Levant crossing bridge that connects Africa with Eurasia. This new form of hominin was characterized by having a marked skeletal gracilization and a dramatic increase in brain size. There were two main important consequences due to the appearance of AMH. The first one was the rapid spreading throughout the planet. By 16,000 years ago, they had occupied the American supercontinent. The second one was that AMH could have been the ones who caused Neanderthals' extinction. Even if the real cause is a mystery, it is probable that AMH's appearance somehow provoked Neanderthals' banishment. The history in the genes. Due to scientific advances, we can analyze the genetic structure of DNA. Applying these techniques to ancient species, it has been discovered that European, Asian, Pacific Islanders, Native Australians, and Native Americans are more closely related to each other than to African people. Coming back to AMH, there were 4 different African lineages that represent its history in the continent: L0, L1, L2, and L3. The first 3 of them are found, respectively, in southern and eastern Africa, western and central Africa, and western and southeastern Africa. The L2 lineage was the most common one. The L3 was the most recent one, and is this lineage the one that experienced a dramatic population explosion? While the 3 most ancient ones had expanded slowly over the last 150,000 years, L3 had a population explosion around 70,000 years ago, quite early after its appearance, 90,000 years ago. The only other lineage that had a population explosion was L2, and it was not until 20,000 years ago. It is interesting to remark that the L3 expansion coincides with the first AMH migrations out of Africa, what makes them to seem closely related. An ingenious solution to an impossible problem. AMH had a bigger brain size, just as Neanderthals, but they had to deal with another problem: the additional social time they needed to secure bondings. One solution to this problem could have been replacing grooming with language, due to advantages of language such as the possibility to interact with several individuals at the same time, to time-share with other activities, to know how your social network is, or to promote interests. Other possible way of bonding could have been dancing and singing, something that was already evolved by archaic hominins, but these bondings wouldn't be as close as the ones created with language. What could be closer to an explanation to this problem would probably be the use of fire. By using fire, they could have more hours of light, hours that could have been used to socialize while surrounding a campfire. Those things could have provoked the creation of jokes and storytelling as tools to facilitate bonding. With this solution, the problem of time could have been solved. When did language evolve? There are some anatomical evidences that guide us looking for when language evolved. These evidences are formed by evidences that distinguish us from the apes, such as the size of the spinal cord in the thoracic region in the chest and the size of the hypoglossal canal in the base of the skull, or evidences that allow us to produce speech, such as the position of the hyoid bone, or to perceive speech, such as difference with the ear canals. These evidences guide us to think that at least speech should have been developed with archaic humans around 500,000 years ago. Even if speech could have been developed, it has to be pointed out that speech is quite different from language. Humming or singing, which significance has been previously introduced, involve the same anatomical structures and the same level of vocal control as speech, so probably anatomical evidences show us when vocal control emerged, but not when language evolved. Mentalizing is another factor that is necessary for the use of language, and by neuroimaging has been discovered that it is quite probable that in primates, mentalizing competencies are correlated with frontal lobe volume. The main point is that, as studies demonstrate, even if Neanderthals could manage to produce language, this wouldn't be as complex as ours, making it even more ambiguous to determine exactly when language evolved. A small problem of reproduction. With the increasing of brain size in AMH, a problem of birth named the obstetric dilemma appeared. Following the standard mammal pattern, mother humans should have had 21 months of pregnancy, but at that time, babies would have a brain size now viable to leave the womb. What made it possible was the adaptation of the length of pregnancy to just 9 months, so the baby's brain could continue developing outside the womb. Even reducing the time of gestation, some anatomical adaptations had to occur to guarantee the birth. Mother's pelvis gets soft to allow the baby to pass through, and baby's plates of the skull are separated to reduce the size of the structure while passing. If the birth goes well, then there's another problem, the extreme demand of supporting a larger brain size. This makes think about AMH receiving some external help, such as symbionts 1, for example, tuberculosis bacterium. Nowadays, it's a terrible illness, but back in that days, it could have helped AMH to acquire vitamin B3, which is essential for brain's normal development.
The next section we will discuss is the end of chapter 7, whatever happened to the Neanderthals. The Neanderthals had lived in Europe and Asia for 300,000 years and disappeared 28,000 years ago. But why? And more importantly, how? Some given explanations are they were unable to cope with the cold of the last ice age, they suffered a major series of volcanic eruptions that created nuclear winter conditions, ecological competition for modern humans, and maybe modern humans deliberately killed them off. Nevertheless, the real answer is almost sure to be the fact that they disappeared because of a combination of circumstances. Those circumstances could have been difficult to cope with, as Neanderthals had smaller prefrontal cortices than modern humans. Thus, they had poor planning capacities and limited abilities to project behavioral events. To end the chapter, it is also important to note our resemblance with Neanderthals. As some scientific research has suggested, we share about 2 and 4% of our DNA with them, a fact that may not seem obvious, but that has shaped our way through evolution. We will now move into chapter 8, which includes why language evolved, naming king, fitting religion into the mix, archaeology and the afterlife, and why so many layers. Why language evolved? There has been a consensus that language evolved to allow humans to exchange factual information about the physical world. However, an alternative view is that language evolved to facilitate social bonding. 3 different versions of the social hypothesis have been proposed. Language for the exchange of information about social relationships, for making arrangements and public declarations, and for mate attraction and retention, which means keeping mates engaged and interested after pair bonding. As well as that, shared language and worldview play a crucial role in the strength of friendships. Furthermore, language allows us to build larger communities by creating a common worldview, by storytelling, and by making people laugh by telling jokes. Naming king. Naming individuals might have appeared very early, but labeling kinship categories is quite sophisticated, as it requires to make generalizations and create linguistic categories. There are 6 types of kinship naming systems: Hawaiian, Eskimo, Sudanese, Crow, Omaha, and Iroquois. They differ in terms of whether they distinguish parallel from close cousins and whether the descendant is categorized as unilaterally or bilaterally. One of the important functions of the kinship naming systems is to specify who can marry who. As well as that, kinship naming helps to identify members of your community in an efficient and fast way. Finally, these linguistic labels can trigger an emotional response that is normally the privilege of close kinship based on deep emotional and biological ties.
Fitting the religion into the mix. As it was explained before, storytelling is an important part of the usage of the language. It allowed to explain the story of ancestors and ancient spirits, and due to it, religion began to root in their daily life. At that time, religion consisted in shamans and trance states that allowed the people to reach the world of spirits. To do so, They combine music and dance with drugs that allow them to experience a personal journey to the transcendental world. Religion was mainly a mechanism of social cohesion. In huge groups, it's quite common to find injustices that build up tensions between the ones who live together. These trance dances restore the balance in the group through the production of endorphins while dancing. The drugs magnify the effects and allow to forget the injustices of the past. This process was repeated the whole time in a loop that maintained the stability of the community. Moreover, religion played a very important role in sociability. Then people became more prosocial toward believers of the same religion. Nevertheless, the use versus them confrontation between different religions were quite common. Archaeology and the afterlife. When talking about afterlife, burials are very important for archaeology because they are an evidence for the beliefs in it. The special position of the corpses, the goods of considerable effort that were with them, and even the entombment of several corpses at the same time are just some proofs for it. But even more important, the complexity of those burials show us that these beliefs in afterlife were being developed for lots of generations. The ancient paintings found in the walls of the caves are thought to be also part of a religious ritual. It is still not known the type of ritual that were performed there. However, the paintings of animals, humans, and abstract symbols joined to the use of 3D reliefs in the rock are a proof of their usage for religious rituals. Why so many social layers? Their society was shaped by different layers of different emotional and social quality. The layer 15 can be described as the social support in everyday life, used mainly in the release of social tensions. Inside of this layer, we can find the layer 5, which is defined by the people who are an intense emotional support for us. The layer 50 is formed by a group of confidence that give us security and protection inside the community we live in, or layer 150. In the community, it's crucial to exchange cooperation in order to survive. Above the community exists the layer 500 that gathers some nearby communities. The function of this group is mainly to exchange genes and information about resources. Last but not least, the layer 1500 builds a trading network that offers protection against environmental turbulence. It's important to highlight that this very big group shares the same language, culture, and also usually morals. To end up with this video, we want to ask a question for the author. As he said in the abstract of Whatever Happened to the Neanderthals, there could be a possibility that humankind, concretely the anatomically modern humans, could have been promoters of the end of Neanderthals. So our question is the following one. In which proportion do you think that anatomically modern humans can have led to the extinction of this race? And that will be all. Thank you so much.